The sky above Mason, Texas, looked like it hadn't seen the sun in days, just a dull, endless gray. Beneath the battered tin roof of the Benson Ranch's old corral, a quiet group of ranchers stood along the fence, saying nothing. In the dirt, curled and barely breathing, lay a dying quarter horse, his light chestnut coat now faded and lifeless. His name was Dusty, and for nearly 30 years he had been the soul of that land. Now all that remained was skin, bone, and memory. At the front of the group stood Lyle Benson, arms crossed tight over his chest, jaw locked. 68 years had carved his face into something hard and quiet. Beside him stood his daughter, Tess, in her early 30s, eyes fixed on the old horse as if staring alone could will him back. She didn't speak, but the tear trembling at the edge of her lashes said everything. Around them, a few of the ranch hands, Ray, the old farrier with silver in his beard, and 2 younger workers, watched in silence. The vet was on his way, and Dusty wasn't moving. Lyle finally spoke, barely louder than the wind. "We've done all we can." The words dropped like stones. Tess turned to him, voice cracking. "He's still breathing." Lyle didn't respond. His gaze stayed on the dirt, somewhere far behind the moment. Dusty had carried him through more storms than any man alive. Through the death of his wife. Through losing half the herd in the drought of '98. But now Lyle looked at the horse like a chapter closing, and he couldn't bear to turn the page. But Tess could. Without a word, she stepped forward and unlatched the gate. Straw crackled under her boots as she knelt beside Dusty, placing a trembling hand on his muzzle. "Hey, old man, it's me, Tess." Nothing. His breathing stayed shallow. Then a flicker. His ear twitched. She leaned in. "You remember? I was just a kid when you let me ride you. You never threw me. Not once." Slowly, one heavy eye opened. His nostrils flared. And then, from deep in his chest, came a sound low, broken, but alive. And then, Dusty moved. His legs shifted beneath him, weak but determined. Tess backed away, hands covering her mouth. The crowd behind the fence leaned in, holding their breath. Dusty grunted, pushed once, slipped, then found his footing. The old quarter horse, forgotten and half dead, was standing. Shaky, thin as wire, but alive. Tess rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around his neck. She sobbed into his mane. "You weren't ready," she whispered. "I knew it." Lyle stepped forward, hat in hand, his face pale. "He was born the week after your mama passed," he said, barely above a whisper. "He's the only one left who remembers what I was back then." Tess looked up at him, confused, but Dusty turned his head, not toward her, but toward Lyle. And in that stare, something sharp, something buried, came alive again. Because Dusty didn't just survive. He remembered, and now, standing there, he was looking straight through Lyle, and into a past he thought he'd buried forever. Dusty didn't move much after he stood. His legs trembled beneath him, and his breathing was still shallow, but there was something different in his eyes now, awareness. Maybe even defiance. Tess stood beside him, one hand resting gently against his neck. He hadn't collapsed again. He was holding on, and she wasn't going anywhere. The others kept their distance. Ray shook his head in disbelief. "I've seen animals hang on before," he muttered. "But that was something else." Lyle didn't respond. He stood a few feet away, hat in hand, looking at Dusty like he was staring into a storm that hadn't hit yet. One he knew was coming. The kind of storm that didn't start in the sky, but deep in the past. Later that afternoon, while the others got back to work, fixing fence posts, hauling feed, Tess refused to leave Dusty's side. She dragged fresh water into the pen, laid clean hay, brushed his coat gently, even as her hands trembled. "You scared the hell out of me, old man," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Dusty leaned into her touch, eyelids heavy, but he stayed standing, and that was enough for her. Inside the barn, Lyle stood alone by the old saddle rack. One of the leather saddles, the one Dusty used to wear, sat dusty and untouched. He ran his fingers across the worn stitching. A memory hit him like a hammer. Dusty, wild and young, bucking hard the first time Lyle tried to ride him. It wasn't just stubbornness. It was fear. The same fear Lyle had carried with him for decades. Not fear of the horse, fear of what the horse had witnessed. Of the night no one ever spoke of. A night tied to Tess's mother. A night Lyle had buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it himself. Until Dusty looked at him like that. Tess came into the barn after sunset, her boots quiet on the wooden floor. She found Lyle still standing there, lost in thought. "He's resting," she said gently, breathing steady. Lyle nodded, but didn't meet her eyes. Tess looked at the saddle. "He still remembers where everything is, even the corner he used to sleep in during storms." Lyle let out a low breath. "Animals don't forget," he said. "Not really. Not when it matters." Tess tilted her head, sensing something just beneath his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, but Lyle turned away. That night, Tess couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight fall across the pasture. Dusty stood near the fence, still and silent. But something about the way he faced the barn made her uneasy, like he was waiting for something, or someone. And in the shadows of the barn, Lyle stood alone, staring at an old photograph buried beneath his workbench. Tess's mother, smiling, holding a newborn foal. Dusty. His hands shook as he slid the photo back into the drawer, locking it. Because if Tess ever knew the truth about that night, everything would fall apart. The next morning came with thick fog, so heavy it swallowed the fence posts whole. Tess was already in the pen before sunrise, her breath visible in the cold air as she stood next to Dusty. He hadn't lain down all night. He stood there like a statue, facing east, his ears twitching with every rustle in the trees. His strength was coming back, slowly, but Tess knew it was more than his body keeping him upright. Something was holding him here. She brushed him in silence, the strokes gentle, rhythmic. "You've seen more than most men ever will," she whispered. "And I bet you remember all of it." Her voice trembled at the edges, though she didn't know why. Something in Dusty's eyes unsettled her. Not fear, not pain, but depth. He knew things no one had said out loud in years. Inside the house, Lyle stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window at them. His coffee had gone cold in his hand. Dusty should have been gone. The vet was supposed to have come. But now that the horse was still alive, walking, eating, looking at him, Lyle couldn't think straight. His chest felt tight. Not from age, not from labor, but from the weight of what he'd hidden. And it wasn't just guilt anymore. It was fear. That afternoon, while Tess was out gathering supplies, Lyle walked to the back of the barn alone. He opened the old wooden door that hadn't creaked in years. Behind it, under a sheet of canvas, lay a box he hadn't touched since the spring of '95. He hesitated. Then he opened it. Inside were papers, letters, one written in a woman's hand, Tess's mother. And beneath them, a small red journal. He picked it up, ran his fingers across the leather cover. Still smelled like her hay and lavender. Lyle sat on the bench, flipping through the pages slowly. Her voice echoed in every line. Notes about Dusty's training. Her dreams of raising a new line of quarter horses. Her fear of someone on the ranch she no longer trusted. Lyle stopped reading. His hands shook. He closed the journal. And then, footsteps. Tess had come back early. She was standing by the barn door, eyes narrowing as she saw the open box. "What is that?" she asked, voice careful. Lyle turned too quickly. "Just old things," he said. Too fast. Too defensive. Tess took a step forward, but he blocked the box with his body. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But Tess knew that tone. She'd heard it her whole life. The voice her father used when he was afraid of what the truth might cost. That night, Dusty paced the fence line restlessly. His hooves kicked up the dirt. Tess watched him from the porch, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She didn't know what was in that box, but she knew whatever it was, Dusty hadn't forgotten. and neither had her father, because some secrets don't stay buried, especially when the one witness is still breathing. The air was dry and heavy that morning, the kind of stillness that makes animals nervous and people quiet. Tess walked slowly through the barn, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. She wasn't feeding the horses yet. She wasn't brushing coats. She was looking for something, for anything. The image of her father shutting that old box the day before had haunted her all night. He hadn't just been startled. He'd been afraid, not of her, but of what she might find. And Tess had grown up around men who knew how to hide fear. When they slipped, you didn't forget it. She reached the back of the barn and found the canvas still covering the shelf. The box was gone, but the dust had been disturbed, faint trails left by hands in a hurry. She crouched, ran her fingers along the wooden floor, and noticed something strange. A torn corner of paper wedged under the bench. She pulled it free. It was a letter. The handwriting was soft and feminine. Not hers, not Lyle's. Tess recognized it instantly. Her mother's. She didn't remember ever seeing her handwriting before. The paper was worn, yellowed by time, but the ink was still clear. If anything happens to me, Dusty will know. He was there that night. I'm afraid Lyle won't tell her what really happened. I don't know who else to trust. Tess stopped reading. Her throat closed. Her mother's words echoed in her skull like thunder in a canyon. What really happened? The phrase clung to her like cold mud. What hadn't she been told? And what had Dusty seen? She stuffed the torn letter in her jacket and walked back outside. Dusty stood in the corner of the pen, head high, eyes fixed on her like he'd been waiting. She approached him slowly. "You were there, weren't you?" she whispered. "Whatever happened? You saw it all." Dusty didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there calm, watching. Tessa's heart pounded. Inside the house, Lyle sat at the kitchen table, staring at the rest of the letter, the part Tess didn't find. He held it in shaking hands. He'd meant to burn it, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The last piece of her, the last warning. He could still hear her voice. "If anything happens to me." His breath caught in his throat. Then the phone rang. It was Ray. His voice was tense. "Hey, just got word. Someone's a-skin around town about your wife. Said they used to work on the ranch. Name's Levi. Does that ring a bell?" Lyle's blood ran cold. He hadn't heard that name in over 30 years. He hung up the phone without answering. His hands gripped the edge of the table. The past wasn't just rising. It was coming back. Tess couldn't stop replaying the words in her head. Dusty will know. He was there that night. The letter was folded in her jacket pocket, worn soft from her fingers going over it again and again. She hadn't shown it to Lyle. Not yet. But everything inside her was screaming that something wasn't right. Not just about her mother's death, but about the life that came after it. By midday, the clouds thickened again. Dusty stood near the gate, ears twitching, eyes scanning the road. He hadn't been eating much, but his energy had returned. More than that, he was alert, almost watchful, as if waiting for something to arrive, or someone. Inside the house, Lyle sat slumped in his chair. The name Levi had slammed into him like a hammer to the ribs. 30 years. He hadn't heard it since the night it all went wrong. Back then, Levi was just another ranch hand. Quiet, strong, the kind of man other men trusted. But Lyle had seen something darker in him. Something Tessa's mother had seen too late. Ray had said Levi was asking questions. That he was in town. That meant he was back. And if Levi was back, it wasn't for nothing. He was looking for something, or someone, and that meant everything Lyle had tried to bury. The truth, the fear, the guilt was rising again, bone by bone. Tess walked in quietly, catching her father off guard. "Who's Levi?" she asked. No lead-in, no softening, just the question, sharp and steady. Lyle looked up too fast. "Where'd you hear that name?" he asked, voice dry. Tess watched his face carefully. "He worked here, didn't he? Around the time Mom died." Lyle stood, his chair scraping back. "He left. Long time ago. Doesn't matter now." But Tess wasn't a child anymore. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't look like you've seen a ghost. Outside, a sudden gust of wind slammed the barn door open. Dusty turned his head, ears perked, his muscles tensed, eyes locked on the empty road. That night, Tess dreamed, not of voices or words, but of Dusty. She saw him, young again, standing in the rain. Lightning cracked, illuminating two figures in the distance. One of them was Lyle. The other, someone she didn't recognize. But Dusty did. The horse reared up, panicked. A scream echoed in the dark. She jolted awake. Downstairs, the porch light flickered. Tess looked out the window. A truck was parked by the gate. Engine off. Door slightly open. Dusty was staring at it, unmoving, eyes locked, tail still. And Tess understood without needing anyone to say it. Whoever was in that truck. Dusty remembered him. The knock came just after sunrise, 3 slow, deliberate raps against the wooden screen door. Tess had barely slept. She stood frozen in the hallway, her eyes darting toward her father, who sat motionless at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, jaw clenched tight. He didn't need to ask who it was. He already knew. Outside, Dusty paced the fence again, more agitated than ever, his ears pinned back, his tail flicking. It wasn't just nerves, it was recognition. Tess opened the door. The man standing there looked like time had dragged him through hell and left him standing. His denim jacket was faded, boots dusty, face worn. But his eyes, sharp and narrow, hadn't changed. "Morning," he said. "Name's Levi. I worked this ranch a long time ago." His gaze slid past Tess, straight into the house, where Lyle hadn't moved an inch. Tess stepped aside just enough. "I know who you are," she said coldly. Levi gave her a crooked smile. "Bet you don't." Lyle stood slowly, every movement heavy. "You've got no business here," he said. His voice was lower than usual, guttural, like it was fighting to stay steady. Levi stepped onto the porch without being invited. "That's where you're wrong, Lyle. I left quiet, never said a word, but I never forgot, and neither did he." He nodded toward Dusty, who now stood rigid by the barn, ears locked on Levi like a predator tracking prey. The old horse let out a sharp snort and stomped the ground. Tess had never seen him like that. "What happened?" Tess demanded, stepping between them. "What are you two hiding?" Levi opened his mouth, but Lyle cut in. "Nothing worth digging up." But Tess was shaking now, with anger, with fear. "My mother left a letter. She knew something. She was scared." Levi's smile dropped. His face darkened. "She had every reason to be." Lyle stepped forward fast, voice rising. "You stay away from her, Levi." But Tess had already seen it. The panic in her father's eyes. And the guilt. Levi turned to her slowly. "Ask him about the night she died. Ask him why the lights were out in the barn. Ask him why Dusty won't go near that spot anymore." Tess turned to her father, but Lyle wouldn't meet her eyes. Not this time. And as the wind picked up through the trees, Dusty let out a low, broken whinny. One that sounded far too much like mourning. The silence after Levi's words was like a thunderclap that never faded. Tess stood between two men, one hiding something, the other determined to drag it out into the light. But neither of them spoke. Only Dusty moved, pacing the fence, agitated, stopping every few steps to turn toward the barn. His tail lashed. His chest rose and fell with sharp breaths. It was as if the old horse could feel the weight of the past pressing into the present. Tess turned to her father. "I'm asking now," she said, voice low and firm. "What happened the night Mom died?" Lyle's face was stone, but his eyes betrayed him. "She fell," he said quietly. "That's what you always said," Tess replied. "She fell and Dusty was there. But she wrote in that letter that something wasn't right, that she didn't trust someone. Was it Levi?" Lyle's hands clenched at his sides. Levi stepped closer. "You think I killed her?" he growled. "I didn't lay a hand on her. But I saw the way Lyle looked at her that night." Dusty let out a sudden, loud snort. He reared slightly, just a few inches off the ground, and then slammed his front hooves into the dirt. His ears were pinned, teeth bared. It wasn't just fear. It was rage. And it was directed at Levi. Tess turned toward the horse, eyes wide. And then it hit her. Dusty wasn't just reacting to a voice. He was reliving something. Something buried in his mind, clear as day, trapped in instinct. The barn door creaked in the breeze, and Dusty bolted. Not away, but toward it. He stopped just outside the frame, staring inside as if he expected to see a ghost. Lyle stepped forward, slower than the others. His voice came out ragged. She found something. She confronted Levi. I don't know what it was. A lie, maybe, or worse. I told her to let it go. But that night, they argued. Tessa's heart pounded. And then what? Lyle looked up, eyes glassy. I came out to the barn. I heard Dusty. He was panicked. I found her at the bottom of the hayloft stairs, neck broken. Levi was gone. Levi's jaw tightened. I ran because you told me to. You said people would talk. Lyle didn't deny it. I was trying to protect my daughter. Tessa's voice cracked. By lying to her for 30 years? She turned away, toward Dusty, who still stood frozen in front of the barn. His eyes locked on a dark corner inside. Tess followed his gaze. And there, beneath a stack of old boards, something caught the light. Metal. Small. Half-buried. She stepped inside. And what she pulled out of the dirt would change everything. Tess knelt slowly, fingers brushing away years of dust and straw until the object came free. It was a small silver locket, its chain tangled, its surface caked with grime. She turned it over carefully. On the back, engraved in delicate cursive, were 2 letters. M.B. Margaret Benson. Her mother. Tess opened it. Inside were 2 tiny photos. One of Tess as a baby, the other of her parents smiling. But there was something about the photo that struck her. Her mother's eyes weren't smiling. They looked afraid. Lyle stepped into the barn's doorway, but didn't approach. His face had drained of color. I haven't seen that since the night she died, he murmured. Tess looked up. Why was it hidden? Lyle shook his head slowly. It wasn't. It must have fallen. Or she dropped it running. Tess stood. Or someone took it off her after she fell. Levi, standing just outside, shifted uncomfortably. I never touched her, he said sharply. You think I'd steal a locket off a dead woman? Dusty let out a sound between a whinny and a growl, guttural, broken. He stomped once, hard, the way he had that night in the dream. Then he backed away from the barn, eyes never leaving Levi. Tess felt her heart pound. He remembers you, she said. Levi's voice turned colder. He was scared of the storm, that's all. But even he didn't sound convinced. Lyle leaned against the doorway, his hand gripping the frame like it was holding him up. She told me she found something in Levi's room. A letter. Money. Something he couldn't explain. That night they fought. I heard them. But by the time I got there, it was too late. Tessa's voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? Lyle looked at her, and in his eyes wasn't just guilt. It was shame. Because I didn't stop her from going out there, and I didn't stop him from leaving. I buried it because I didn't want you to see me as weak, or as the man who failed her. Levi crossed his arms, staring at the floor. I didn't push her, but I ran, because I knew no one would believe me. The barn was quiet. Dusty lowered his head, breathing heavy, still watching Levi like he expected movement. Tess held the locket in her hand, tightening her grip. This doesn't feel like an accident, she said softly. And I think Dusty's been waiting all this time for someone to see it. And just as she spoke, the sound of another truck engine echoed in the distance. Tires crunching gravel fast, coming toward the house. And someone else was about to arrive. Someone who wasn't in any of the letters, but was in Dusty's memory all along. The truck came to a stop in front of the house, its engine rattling before it shut off. Tess stepped out of the barn, locket still clenched in her hand, heart thundering in her chest. Lyle stood beside her, rigid. Levi didn't move, but his face had turned pale. A tall woman stepped out of the driver's side. She wore a worn leather coat, sunglasses, and a scar that curved across her cheek like an old wound. Tess had never seen her before, but something about her felt familiar. Dusty lifted his head and let out a low, breathy snort, then took 2 steps forward, ears perked, as if in recognition. The woman removed her glasses. Her voice, when she spoke, was rough with time. "My name's June Caldwell. I worked here, a long time ago, with Margaret." Tess froze. That name, June. Her mother had once mentioned it in an old notebook she found as a child. A friend who left suddenly. Lyle's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be here," he said sharply. June's eyes narrowed. "I should have come back a long time ago, but I thought Levi left. I didn't know he stayed quiet all these years." She turned to Tess. "Your mother wasn't just afraid. She was being watched." Dusty paced again, this time more agitated. His eyes flicked between June, Levi, and Lyle. The air felt too heavy to breathe. Tessa's voice came out hollow. "Watched by who?" June stepped closer. "She told me she found a journal in Levi's quarters. Not just about money, but names. Men who were paying someone to get inside this ranch. Your mom thought she was uncovering something bigger. And the night she died, I think she was silenced." Levi's fists clenched. "I didn't kill her," he barked. "I argued with her. That's all. But Lyle, he told me to run. Told me if I loved this place, I'd disappear." Tess turned to her father, eyes sharp. "You said you didn't know what she found, but you told Levi to leave? You knew more than you told me." Lyle's voice trembled. "I was trying to protect you." June's voice cut through like a blade. "You were protecting yourself. Margaret trusted me and I failed her. I left because I was scared of what this place was becoming. But Dusty," she looked toward the old horse. "He never left. He stayed. He saw it all." Dusty stepped closer now, nose flaring, as if drawn to the barn again. But this time, he stopped in front of Tess, pressing his head into her shoulder, trembling slightly. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something that felt like release. Tess gently ran her hand along his neck, staring at the 3 people before her, each one holding a piece of a story that had been buried in silence and guilt. And then June looked Tess dead in the eyes. "There's one more thing you don't know, and it's not about your mother." She paused, took a breath. "It's about you." The silence after June's words was suffocating. Tess stood frozen, Dusty pressed against her side, as if bracing her for something heavy. Lyle didn't speak. His eyes were down, his hands trembling. Levi stared at the ground. It was June who broke the silence again. Margaret wasn't just uncovering corruption. She was planning to leave. And not alone. Tess blinked. "What are you talking about?" June looked her in the eye. "You weren't Lyle's biological daughter. Margaret told me everything before she died. Your real father was someone she met before she married Lyle. And she was going to take you and start over." The words landed like a hammer. Tess felt the world tilt. "You're lying," she whispered. But her voice had no strength. Lyle finally looked up. His eyes were red. "It's true," he said, broken. "She told me the night she died. Said she was leaving. I begged her to stay. I was angry. I said things I regret. And when she ran from the house to the barn, I didn't follow right away. When I finally did, it was too late." Levi stepped back, shaken. "So all this time you weren't protecting her memory. You were protecting your place in her story." Dusty whinnied low, stepping between Tess and Lyle. The old horse stood tall, as if placing himself in the center of truth. June took a slow breath. He saw everything that night. Margaret's fall, the fight, the storm. He never forgot. That's why he refused to step back into the barn. And why he didn't let go. Not until someone was ready to see what really happened. Tess looked down at Dusty, and suddenly it all made sense. His loyalty, his pain, his refusal to die. He had held on to protect a truth no one else would carry. Tess turned to Lyle, tears welling in her eyes. "You raised me. You gave me your name. But you lied to me every single day." Lyle's voice cracked. "I didn't want to lose you too." Tess stood there for a long moment, then walked forward. She hugged him, not out of forgiveness, but because the weight between them had finally been named. "The truth doesn't break us," she whispered. "The silence does." Levi, with his head low, turned and walked toward the truck. June followed slowly. The past was done with them now. And as the sun finally broke through the gray sky, Dusty walked slowly toward the open field. One last walk through the land he never left. Tess watched him go, heart heavy, eyes full. He paused at the hilltop, looked back once, and then disappeared behind the ridge. Not in pain, not lost, but free.